Good morning everyone. Today we will start with the new lesson of history, that is French Revolution. Okay. First we need to understand the meaning of the revolution, what the revolution is. Revolution is change in any political institution. For example, if in any country, if monarchy is there, if that monarchy changes into a democracy, okay, because of any reason, so that sudden change, drastic change is known as the revolution. So in France also, earlier monarchy was there and that monarchy changed into a republic. So what were its causes, okay, and what were the causes behind the revolution, that we are going to study in this lesson. But okay. Now you might have heard the name of this Bourbon. Okay, Bourbon. What is Bourbon? Yes, good. Bourbon is the name of a biscuit, and this Bourbon at that time was one of the dynasty. Okay, Bourbon dynasty. This Bourbon biscuit, the name which it got, it is taken from this royal family, or we can say from the Bourbon dynasty. Okay, so this is this French Revolution happened in 18th century. Now, what is the 18th century? What is the exact period of the 18th century? Is from 1701 to 1799. Many children consider that 18th century means 1801 to 1899. So this is wrong. 18th century means 701 to 799. So this French Revolution happened in the 18th century. Now what happened exactly in 1774? In 1774, Louis the 16th, here S is silent, Louis the 16th, he became the king of the France when he was just 20 years old. Okay, he was very young at that time. When he was just 20 years old, he became the king of the France. He got the throne. How many years old he was? He was 20 years old. Okay, then after that what happened? He married to a Austrian princess Marie Antoinette. Married to Austrian princess Marie Antoinette. Austria is different and Australia is different. Australia is a country near the New Zealand, and Austria is near the France. Okay, so he got married to a beautiful princess of Austria, that is Marie Antoinette. Now you will say everything was going on smoothly when he was just 20 years old, when he was very younger, he got the throne, and he, on the top of that, he married to a beautiful princess of Austria. So what was the problem? So here only when he became the king and he got the married, the problem started arising. Now which problem and how they started arising, that we will see. The main problem was this: upon his accession, means when he became the king, at that time he found that treasury was empty. He found that there was no money with France. Okay, he found the treasury was empty, and there were many reasons why the treasury was empty. That we will study later on. First, we will see that how the society was there in the France, that people were divided into which society, which kind of people were living, and how they suffered. That we will see how the society of the France was divided. Okay, France society was divided into 3 states. Okay, first state, second state, and third state. Okay, so which people were there in the first state? So in the first state, clergies were there. Clergy. Now clergy means what? At that time most of the population was Christian. Catholics were there, so many churches were there. The people who were performing the religious works at the church, they were known as the clergy. Now if we will relate it with India, in India at that time Pandits were there, or we can say Purohits were there. Purohits, those who used to give the advice to the kings. Okay, so in the same way in France clergies were there. So in the first state clergy. In second state, nobility. Nobility means which people? Nobility means king, queens, the relatives of the king, or the people who were very rich, powerful. All those people were considered in the nobility. Now, what was the special about this first estate and second estate? If you take birth in the first estate and second estate, you enjoyed the privileges. So, in the same way, these people of the first estate and third estate, they also enjoyed some privileges. So, which privileges they enjoyed? That they didn't have to pay any tax. This was the privilege. They didn't pay any tax. Didn't pay taxes. Okay. So, this was the special privilege what the first estate and second estate people enjoyed. What about the third estate? So, rest all the people, like this estate is also known as the peasantry. Peasantry. Why? Because 90% of the population of the third estate, peasants were there, farmers were there. So, that's why this third estate was also known as the peasantry. Rest all the people like merchants, lawyers, teachers, manufacturers, all these people came under the category of the third estate. Now, these people of the third estate, they had to suffer a lot. Now, how they had to suffer? Because they had to pay the taxes. Whatever the taxes were imposed by the government or by the clergy, all those taxes who had to pay? Third estate. Because as I told you that first estate and second estate, they enjoyed the privilege. They didn't have to pay any tax. So obviously, who will pay the tax? The people of the third estate. It means that we can see the disparity. We can see the disparity between first, second estate and third estate. So who was enjoying now? First and second estate, and who was suffering? The people of the third estate. So who brought the revolution? What do you think? Who brought the revolution? Third estate people brought the revolution, because those people were suffering, right? Now, how the revolution was brought and what were its causes, that we will see later on. As I introduced you earlier that King Louis XVI, he became the king. This is the picture of him. His wife Marie Antoinette. Okay. French society during late 18th century, first estate, second estate and third estate. First estate clergy, second estate nobility, and third estate peasantry. These two estates were enjoying the privileges by birth. They didn't have to pay any tax, and third estate people, they had to pay the taxes. Now, which kind of taxes they had to pay? The first tax was tethys. Tethys means the tax which was imposed by the clergy. Okay, they had to directly give that tax to the clergy. How much tax they had to give? They had to give 1/10 of the tax. Suppose the farmer is producing 100 kg of wheat. So, how much he had to give to the clergy? He had to give 10 kg to the clergy. So, this was the tethys, tax levied by the or imposed by the church. And taille was a tax which was directly imposed by the government, the tax which the people of the third estate had to give to the government. Okay, so this was the tethys and taille, the taxes the people of the third estate had to pay. I hope till here it is understood. Okay, let's move further. Okay. Now, as I told you in the beginning that when the King Louis XVI, when he became the king, the treasury was empty. Okay. Now, what were the reason why the treasury was empty? Those reasons we will see now one by one. So, the first reason was long years of wars. Long years of wars. Now, what is this long years of wars? Now, at that time in late 18th century, the France was fighting war against Britain. Okay, this Britain and France, they were the enemies of each other. Okay, so they both fought war against each other, and in that, it's obvious when you are fighting war against any country, then you need many expenses. You need army. Then you will have to give money to the those people who are there in the army. Then you will need animals like elephants, horses, weapons you will need, right? So it means fighting a war, it needed money. Okay, so the long years of wars with Britain drained all the resources of the France. So this was one of the reason why the treasury was empty. First and most important reason, that long years of wars. Second is, king was living in a very huge palace, and the name of that palace was Palace of Versailles. That palace was in Paris. Okay, So the maintenance of that palace, for the maintenance of the palace, the king had to pay lot of expenses, because that palace was very huge and expensive. So the maintenance was required for that palace. So huge amount of money was spent in the maintenance of the palace. So this was the second reason, palace, maintenance of the palace. Okay. Then third is American War of Independence. At that time, how we were the colonies of the Britishers, Britain, okay, means Britishers were ruling on us, on India. So it means that we were the colony of the Britain. So in the same way, America was also a colony of the Britain, okay. So Britain was ruling on America. So the people of America, they started raising their voice because they wanted freedom, they wanted to get independence. So they fought a war against Britain. So that was known as the American War of Independence. So who were fighting at that time? America and Britain. They were the enemies of each other. And earlier in the first point I told you that France was also fighting a war against Britain. It means that America and France, they had the common enemy. And who was their enemy? Their enemy was Britain. As we say, enemy's enemy is our friend, right? So in the same way, France and America, they became friends, okay. So when you are offering friendship to someone, then when that friend is in need, you will have to give a helping hand to that friend. So in the same way, now who was in the need, who wanted help? America wanted help when it was fighting a war against Britain. So what the France did? France gave helping hand to America. And so in what way France helped America? So France offered or gave 2 billion livres. Livre was the currency of the France at that time. So 2 billion livre was given to America by the France, okay. So which was borrowed by the other countries, means at that time France was also not having this much of amount. So France borrowed that money from the other countries. It means we can say that the France took loan from the other countries. Okay, so this was the third reason, American War of Independence. And one more thing, that when America got the independence, when America became free from Britain, at that time the people of France, they gave a Statue of Liberty. Now Statue of Liberty, everybody knows that it is one of the seven wonders of the world, okay. So that Statue of Liberty was gifted by the people of France when America became free from the Britain, okay. Next is high interest on loan. As I told you earlier that 2 billion livre was borrowed by the other countries, right? It means that France took loan from the other countries. So what the other countries did, that they imposed high interest. How much interest? They took 10%. 10% of interest was charged by the other countries on the France. So they had to give a high interest on the loan. So you can imagine this is a very huge or handsome amount they had to give to the other countries. Next is the regular expenses. Now regular expenses means what? To maintain army or whatever the government offices were there at that time. So to maintain that, to maintain the courts, and one more thing, that Marie Antoinette, his wife, the wife of the King Louis XVI, she also was very expensive, means she was wearing expensive clothes. For her hairstyle, the king had to spend lot of money, or she always liked to do party. So for that was also one of the expense the king had to pay. So these all were the reasons why the treasury was empty. And the last, the tax was paid only by the third estate. As we have discussed earlier, that first estate and second estate people, they enjoyed the privileges by birth, right? They didn't have to pay any tax. So who was paying all the taxes? The people of the third estate, the people from the lower strata, the people who were already very poor, those people were paying the taxes, right? So what the king thought? The king thought to increase the tax. Whatever the tax the third estate people were paying, he thought to increase that tax, okay? So when he told that he wanted to increase the tax, then what happened further, that we'll discuss later on. Read the thought. Our thought is also related with our lesson, that poverty is the father of the revolution and the crime. At last I'll ask you what is the relation of our thought and the lesson. As I told you that Palace of Versailles, it was a very huge palace, and lots of money was needed for the maintenance. Here you can see in this picture how huge the palace was. Next is subsistence crisis. Subsistence crisis. Now this is a very difficult word. First, let us try to understand what the subsistence crisis is. Subsistence crisis means when your basic needs are endangered, when you are not able to get your basic needs, like which are our basic needs: food, shelter and clothing, right? So when we don't get those needs, when those needs are endangered, we have to struggle a lot to get those needs. So that situation is known as the subsistence crisis. So at that time, the people of France, they also had to do that struggle. They were also going through this subsistence crisis because their basic needs were in danger. So what were the reasons why they were not getting the basic needs? There were also reasons behind that. Let us try to understand what those reasons were. The first reason was the population. Now, how the population can be the reason for the subsistence crisis? The population of the France increased at that time. Here you can see 23 million population was there in 1715 and 28 million population was there in 1789. 5 million population increased, right? So as the population increased, the demand of the food grain also increased, right? Population increased, then demand of food also increased, okay? But as the demand of the food increased, the production remained same. The production of the food grain remained same. So what was the reason why the production could not increase? As I told you that population was increasing, so the production also should get increased. So what was the reason why the production was not increased? So the reason was the natural calamities occur. Now which were those natural calamities? Drought and health. These were the two natural calamities occurred in France at that time. Drought means when there is a less water, less supply of water or shortage of water, we can say, that is known as a drought. And hail means a frozen rainfall. Okay, so because of these two, the harvest also reduced. And because the harvest reduced, the production remained same. Okay, so as the production remained same, the demand of food grain increased, the production remained same. So what happened? The prices of the food grain increased. Prices increased. Now how the prices increased? Suppose for example, I have one chalk and 5 children are there. The production of chalk is same, or it is, we can say, less. So among these 5 children, whoever will have more money, I will give that chalk to that person. It means that the value of this chalk increased, right? So in the same way, at that time, the production the price of the food grain also increased. So what happened as the price of food grain increased? The wages were fixed of the laborers. Many people from the third estate, they were from the lower strata. It means they were very poor, we can say. So their wages were fixed and the prices increased. It means that they could not afford the food, right? So these were the reasons of the subsistence crisis. First, population increased. As the population increased, demand of food grain also increased, but the production remained same. And why the production remains same? Because of the natural calamities, drought and hail. Because of these two natural calamities, the production remained same. So that's why harvest also reduced, and as the harvest reduced, the prices of the food grain increased, and as the prices of the food grain increased, the people, those who were very poor, they could not afford the meal of 2 times. It means that they had to struggle for their basic need. It means that they were suffering from subsistence crisis. I hope till here it is understood. If you have any doubt, you can ask children. Very good. Nobody has any doubt. It means everything is understood. Now, a growing middle class. A growing middle class. Now, what is this growing middle class? Now, as I told you earlier, in the third state, all the rest of the people were there, those who were poor, lawyers, manufacturers, merchants, teachers, peasants, all these people were from the third estate. So what happened in late 18th century, one section of that third estate, they became prosperous. Okay, prosperous means they became richer, they started getting money. Okay, so from which these people were and how they started getting money, that we will see. Who those people were? First thing, those were merchants, then lawyers, manufacturers. Okay, all these people of the middle class, they started becoming prosperous. And what is the magic? In one night they became prosperous, they started getting money? No. So what was the reason? At that time industrialization started in France, right? Industrialization means these people started establishing industries in the France. What they did? They started establishing industries. And when they established the industry, whatever the good they were getting from that industry, so that good they were transporting to the other countries by using the seaway. By using seaway, that good was transported to the other countries, and in this way they became prosperous, they started getting money. Okay, so when they started getting money, what they did? They got educated. Okay, earlier as they were poor, they didn't have sufficient money, so now they became prosperous. So what they did, they started getting educated themselves, as well as they were giving education to their children also. And when they became educated, what they did, they got a voice to oppose. They started opposing, and against what they were opposing? So they believed that no group should be privileged by birth. As I told you earlier, first estate and second estate people, they were enjoying few rights by birth, they enjoyed few privileges by birth. Okay, so these people, the growing middle class people, the people who became prosperous, they started raising their voice and they said that the people should not be given the privileges, no people should be given the privileges by birth. Everybody is equal and everybody should be treated equally. Okay, so this was all about the growing middle class. Growing middle class was from the third estate. Few people started becoming prosperous. What was the reason? Because they started establishing industries. Whatever goods they were getting from that industry, they were transporting that good to the other countries by using seaways. In this way they became prosperous, and when they became prosperous, they educated themselves and when they educated themselves, they got a voice against the privileges which the people were enjoying by birth. I hope till here it is understood, children. If it is understood, if anybody has any doubt, you can ask. No one? Okay. Let's move further. Let us try to learn this as a type of story. This is very interesting lesson and very important also. This revolution was the first revolution ever happened in the world, so that's why we are this chapter is very important. Many countries took inspiration from this French Revolution. Even Rajaram Mohan Roy, he also took inspiration from the French Revolution. Okay. Then the growing middle class who became prosperous, they demanded a society based on group should not be privileged by birth, as I told you earlier. So from where they got this inspiration? They got this inspiration from the philosophers. Now who are those philosophers and what inspiration they got from the philosophers, that we will see. Role of philosophers. Role of philosophers. Okay. First thing, who are the philosophers? Philosophers means a section, or we can say few people from the society. They have their own way of thinking. They have their own ideology. That is, those people who are having the different point of view, those are known as the philosophers. So at that time, some philosophers were there from whom the middle class, the growing middle class, took the inspiration. So who those philosophers were, that we will study one by one. They gave the ideas of equality and freedom. First, John Locke, he was one of the philosopher from whom those middle class people took the inspiration, and he wrote one book. What was the name of that book? The Two Treaties of the Government. Okay, he wrote that book, and the people of middle class, when they read that book, they got the inspiration. And what was written in that book? Refute the doctrine of divine and absolute right. Now what is it? Earlier the people believed that whatever the rights the king had, monarchy was there, king was ruling, so in whatever way he could do whatever he wanted to do. Okay, and what the people thought, what the people believed, that king got all the rights from the God. Whatever rights are given, those rights are given by the God. So John Locke wrote in that book that it's nothing like that. Nobody has given any right. All the people are equal and all the people should be treated equally. Okay. So this was the ideology of which philosopher? John Locke. Okay. And which book he wrote? Two Treaties of the Government. See, this is a picture of John Locke. Okay. Then second philosopher is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Okay. Which book he wrote? He wrote the book The Social Contract. And what he wrote in that book? Equal voting and democratic government should be there. At that time in France, equal voting system was not there. How the voting was conducted, that I'll explain you later on. So he demanded, or he wrote in that book, that equal voting should be there and democratic government should be there. Monarchy should not be there. A whole and sole power should not be vested in the king's hand or in few hands. Okay, democracy should be there. Everybody should have the equal power. Okay, so this was the ideology of the Jean-Jacques Rousseau. In The Social Contract he wrote. This is the picture of the Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Next is Montesquieu. Now Montesquieu, he wrote the book The Spirit of Laws, and what he wrote in that book, the division of powers should be there. Okay, the power should be divided. The power should not be vested in one hand. Like earlier monarchy was there, so the power was in king's hand, right? So the power should be divided. Legislative, executive and judiciary. This everybody knows. Legislative means the one who makes the law. Executive means those who implement those laws, and judiciary means who takes the decision whether the laws are being followed properly or not, or to give the justice to the people, right? So it means that Montesquieu wrote that the power should be divided, power should not be vested in king's hand. Okay, so this was the ideology of the Montesquieu. Here you can see the photo of the Montesquieu. Let us once revise. Role of the philosopher. Who was the first philosopher? John Locke. He wrote the Two Treaties of the Government, and he refuted the doctrine of the absolute right. Then next was Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He wrote the book The Social Contract, in which he wrote that equal voting right and the democratic government should be there. Next was Montesquieu. He wrote The Spirit of Laws, in which he wrote that the power should be divided equally and it should not be vested in one hand. Legislative, executive and judiciary, in this way the power should be divided. Now the people of the middle class, as I told you, that they took the inspiration from these philosophers, so they enlightened their ideas, and what they were doing, they were reading all these books in which these ideas were written, and they were discussing in the public places, whichever the public places were there, like bus stand, railway station. They were discussing all these things on the public places with the people of the third estate. So the ideas were spread among the people. The people also got the ideas, and they also became enlightened, and they also started raising their voice. So the Louis XVI planned to impose the further taxes. As I told you at the time, that King Louis XVI, he was planning to increase the taxes because the treasury was empty and he wanted to fill up the treasury. So he planned to impose the further taxes. When he introduced, or when he said that he wants to increase the taxes, then what happened? This is the base of the revolution. Here the actual revolution starts. Okay. Now, outbreak of the revolution. This point we will start tomorrow. Okay. Let us once revise what we have studied today. French society was divided into three estates: first estate, second estate and third estate. In first estate, clergy, nobility, and in third estate, peasants. 90% of population was farmers were there. Then the reasons for the empty treasury: long years of wars, maintenance of Palace of Versailles, American War of Independence, high interest on loans, regular expenses, the taxes was paid only by the third estate, and the king was forces to increase the taxes. Then subsistence crisis, the people were suffering, they were struggling to survive, their basic needs were in danger because the population was increasing, the production of food grain remains same. Because the production of food grain remains same, what was the reason behind that? Drought and health. So this led to the reduction of the harvest, and as because the harvest reduced, the prices of the food grain increased and the wages of the laborers were fixed. This was all about the subsistence crisis. The growing middle class. From the third estate, a section or we can say few people they became prosperous, they started becoming rich, and from who those people were? Merchants, lawyers, manufacturers, traders, all these people started becoming rich. And how? Because at that time industrialization started, and whatever the goods were produced in the industries, though that good was transferred to the other countries by using the seaway. In this way they became prosperous, they became richer. So when they became richer, they started getting educated themselves, and they got a voice against whatever the wrong things were going on in the France. And from whom they took the inspiration? They took the inspiration from the philosophers. So which the philosophers were? John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Montesquieu. Okay. Now outbreak of the revolution will start in tomorrow's lesson. Okay. Now this is the homework, children, note it down. Write a short note on National Assembly. Complete this homework. Tomorrow I am going to check your homework. Note it down. Thank you.